Hey everyone, and welcome to the Therapeutic Podcast. As the name suggests, this podcast is everything about therapy and mental health, hosted by two counseling psychologists who have a lot to say, and who would otherwise just sit beside a fireside and talk about it. So instead, here we are. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Ma'am, I have heard a lot of stories that explains the human animal bond. Like there have been people who refuse to move to a better house, or people who have been homeless and have been giving a home, but they refuse to leave their pets because they're family to them. They're like their children, and they don't want to leave them. And I've heard stories of people who have their health is drastically improved because they had a pet with them, especially as you mentioned before, people who have had PTSD, and they were advised, they were prescribed to have an animal or spend some time with animal daily or once a week, like that. And so there have always been this question comes to mind: what happens when that pet is gone? So how do people deal with that? Like, I think pet grief is something that we do not talk about a lot. So what do you have to say about it?
I think it is very, very real. It's as real as losing any member of your family. And I don't uh, really feel, because I have lost pets myself. So I don't think there is any sort of difference probably between losing a human family member and an animal family member. And the only problem is probably it's not perceived the same way by the people around you. That is where the crux of the problem lies. There are two issues out of it. One is wherein people say that pets, of course, we know or companion animals have shorter lifespans. So again, you are putting yourself through undue grief, because you know that probably the max a pet would live is only so many years. So you know that that grief is impending, and then you're putting yourself through it. Well, I respect those opinions also, but somewhere I feel, and people also have a lot of concerns when there is an animal visiting, or children, or when children have a pet. How do children take it in particular? Or suppose if someone is very ill and there is a visiting animal, and the person was improving in the company of that animal, and now that animal passes away, does it lead to a entire setback in the entire treatment process? All of these are realities. All of these can happen. But I feel that all of these reasons are not enough for us to forego the benefits of animal companionship, because animals give us a lot, even in that short time. And I think grief is a part of life, whether it's loss, anything that you like leads to grief, because eventually you're going to lose it. Nothing is permanent. So what helps is, how are you going to deal with that loss, or how are you going to help the person deal with that loss? So I think running away from that scenario and saying that, okay, I don't want my, or want a patient to have visiting animals because eventually, something happens to the animal, or I don't want, to have a pet because if something happens to the pet, I think that is a very utopian scenario. You cannot run away from everything in life. You have to face it. But how do you face it? So let us come to the point of, how do you face it, or how do you help others face it? So I feel somewhere moments like these can be very, very useful. I have seen, because when I was at Purdue, they have a very good system of helping people deal with grief. The grief that follows the loss of a pet, the grief that follows, say, euthanize your pet because the pet has a terminal illness. Or, how do you deal with it? Firstly, you have to recognize that that is grief, that is real, real grief. And uh, secondly, help that person in whatever way. So I think every person's way of grieving is very, very unique, very, very different. With children, you have to explain things to them a little bit more, and probably help them, assist them in processing their grief. It can be, talking about the animal that is lost. It can be, collecting memorabilia. It can be, doing a lot of things, whatever the child or the person or the adult, whoever feels like, whatever they feel like, doing to keep that memory alive. And of course, you cannot, so there may be sometimes with patients, I have heard of patients who refuse to have another visiting animal because they were very attached to this particular animal. And they say that, no, I don't want to see another animal again. Probably respect that decision also for whatever time it takes for them to get over it. And give them some memories of the animal, help them be with that. It's not like just because a person or an animal is dead, it's done. There is a legacy that continues. Help them build that legacy, because that also helps get over that kind of grief. So I will tell you what, like, for instance, when I lost my pet, I think and it was COVID time, so it was lockdown phase. And how people can help. So I remember that we had to cremate my dog, and it was like nighttime. We couldn't, keep her till the morning. And I remember the kindness of the watchman and the house helps in our apartment, who brought in all the wood that they had kept for their cooking and everything. And some of them even said that, okay, when you do it, you have to put salt and all those practices. So I think that helped me cope with the grief, just to see the kindness of people. And I think these also become good times, or good memories for children, for people in general. Like, if you make it a good scenario to see how people can help, how people can come together, what kind of social support you can receive in a society, how human beings can show their best selves in situations like this. And I still remember all that process, and keeping certain things for memory. So the moment you're not ridiculed, or that, okay, it was a dog, why are you crying for a dog, why are you crying for a guinea pig, the moment you're supported in that process, the moment there are people standing with you, legitimizing that experience, I feel it's a good learning experience, even for a kid, to know that there is pain. You have ways of dealing with that pain, because all of these teach them that tomorrow, if I have a pain, these are the ways of dealing with it. This is how I can deal with it. And also having that experience of getting over that pain, because you become stronger with every experience. And probably getting a new pet, or getting attached with a new animal. And as you say, the more your heart expands in a way. I would say, it's not just a quotation of your heart does expand. You know that you can get over things. And so I feel there is no running away from it. Don't say that I will not get a pet, or I will not interact with an animal, because eventually something will happen. Everything, anything, like, then you have to be some kind of a loner who doesn't connect with anyone in this world. But this is an experience wherein, with the right kind of support, you know how to deal with it. Tomorrow, because I had that kind of support, tomorrow if someone tells me that I lost my pet, I know how I can support that person, a number of ways in which I can support that person. And I think it makes us better human beings, and better people, and stronger people, like those kind of experiences. But again, I will underline, it depends upon what kind of support you get. If that grief is not recognized, it can, it can be, it can have the worst possible consequences.
I think you gave us a reality check here. Like, nothing is permanent and everything you love eventually hurts. So,
Eventually it hurts. I mean, that's why I seriously argue with people who tell me that, okay, the pet is going to eventually. I say, and nowadays when people take a pet, I tell them that be prepared for it. Know that, in another, like, depending upon the breed, the species, in this years, this is going to come. But don't lose out on, because I know that, of course, my first pet passed away, but I will never say that, okay, it was better if I had not gone. See, there is a part of me which has gone, and a part of me which still celebrates. So it's a very different experience to, to explain. But I feel what you get is so much that you will celebrate all your life. You will celebrate that memory all your life if you're given the right kind of support. And eventually you will know that, that creature was there for a purpose. It has served its purpose. You have had a good life. And I mean, you have good memories. What more you'd need in life? Eventually, life is a set of memories, like, and you'll have a good, memory with you when you're dying. Like, what else do you need in life?
There's also, I've seen people who, when their dog gets really old and they know that the dog is going to pass away pretty soon, just before the dog passes away, they bring another dog in, like a puppy, And most of the times they say they've brought in the puppy for the older dog, for the senior dog. But sometimes I look at it in a way that they've got it for themselves, that they already have something else that they can shift their focus to as well before, I mean, the other dog passes away. So I feel like sometimes they're not fully accepting the grief of this dog going away, because it's immediately diverted to another dog that's immediately there with you. So is that also a process of grief, or is it just, I look at it as a rebound, to be very honest. I'm like, okay, you jumped immediately from one dog to the other, and you're not completely fully like grieving about the loss.
I think I would still very much respect that decision, because people have different ways of coping up. I feel probably I also agree, like probably I coped better with the loss of one dog because I had two other dogs. Just imagine coming back to an empty home. Just imagine that. Just imagine that emptiness. Probably it would have been very, very difficult to deal with. But then it comes with its own intricacies, depending also upon how long that dog has been there, because you also see dogs going through a process of grief for the other dog that is lost. I still remember my good dogs going and, sniffing around, searching for. So that is a process. But I think somewhere, probably not dealing with that entire emptiness is, something which isn't, you don't want to slip into that kind of a loop, because you have other dogs, that you have to get up, you have to take them for a walk, you have to get back to normal life. So somewhere I think that is useful, provided you are not neglecting your senior dog in the process of, because getting a new dog is again a task. Like, a puppy is a task, a senior dog is a task. You should not neglect your senior dog, because it may be craving for attention. It may need that kind of support. So I feel that is also important. And if you have that kind of maturity, I think this is a good, scenario as well. Do whatever it takes to cope. And I would not say that, I do not know whether I call it a rebound. I think it's just a way of coping with grief. And grief, from my own experience, I think we have had these discussions in the classroom. But grief is strange. I have cried only one day for my dog, the day my dog died. The next day, I think getting busy with every sort of stuff. Of course, I didn't want to sit in that room where my dog had passed away, because, I there is also one thing which I often tell, like which I have read, and I think it's important that when your animal is passing away, probably all that you can do is to be with the animal. It would find comfort being with someone it knows. So I remember those 4 hours, sitting till my dog passed away, just sitting with the dog. So I didn't want to be in that room. It was too traumatic for me, at least for the first couple of days. But I got back to work, and that is grieving. That is one way of grieving. I got back to looking after my other pets. I got back to doing a lot of stuff. Probably 6 months later, when I was not even in this town, I was somewhere else in Bangalore, and I just woke up with with a memory of Tiger, and I was crying the entire day. So grief has its very strange. 2 years later, this year, even the day that she passed away, I was fine. I had no issues. Like, of course, you have a memory, but a couple of days later, you break down. So grief has its own ways. Cope with it in whatever way you can cope with it. If it's getting a new dog, if you can give justice to both the dogs, do it. You have to cope with it. You have to move forward. You have to be able to celebrate the memory of your animal. I think that's the best thing you can do. And that can happen only if you're coping, right?
I wonder how this would be, how this would be if it was a human. I mean, of course, it's very
Mhm.
different, right? Like the
Yes.
comparison cannot be made. Yeah.
But I think even with human parents, when after, of course, it's difficult, but after they lose a child, many people advise them that when you're ready for it, if you are able to, it's important to have another child, because otherwise you are slipping into that emptiness. So see, people may have different ways of coping. Some people may just take up a pet after the loss of a child. Some people may just choose to
Hmm.
cope in whatever way. So everyone has their own ways. Personally, I feel not having an empty house, not having any sound of an animal, versus having two dogs who are still there, really helped me.
I think there's just one last thing I wanted to ask. You, because you've also studied in the US, right? And you are from here, India. Is there a difference that you've seen with the way animal assisted interventions are looked at in both the places? Because I mean, from the videos and a lot of things that I've seen, there's a lot of work that goes on in the US in relation to animal assisted interventions, but in India, I haven't come across a lot of such opportunities.
I think also because this entire concept of, pets has a very Euro-American, notion, at least largely. Probably because not that, see, there is one thing where you talk about human-animal bonding. I think that is there across cultures. But this concept of having a pet in your home, a pet which popularly belongs to a certain species, may be more of a Euro-American concept. Of course, it's catching up a lot now, probably because with countries developing, you have more disposable incomes, and people can afford to have a pet in the house, because pets were also largely seen as a sign of luxury, even in the in all Asian cultures. So probably because you have this concept of a companion animal in a certain way, it's more acceptable to have an animal around, to have an animal in your home, to interact with an animal, and maybe that is also a reason why the research has proliferated a lot there. But in India, I think we are still at this crossroads wherein we still have to figure out what exactly are we doing, because as I was telling Meenal, animal assisted interventions as such also have a lot of cultural baggage attached to them. So you may not be able to pick out something which has worked in the US and bring it to India, because in India, the entire concept of a pet may be different. The entire concept of what is considered a companion animal may be different. The kind of spaces that companion animals occupy may be different, but that doesn't mean that there is no bonding between a human and an animal. So, of course, I have seen a lot of differences in how AI is conceptualized or seen in the US, versus people have told me that this doesn't work in India because people don't have pets, which I disagree with, because I think the crux of this is human-animal bonding. It is not technically having a pet, which is supposed to be a popular pet, like a species like a dog or a cat or something of that sort. So how it should work is basically, how do we leverage this bonding between humans and animals? That is the basis of animal-assisted intervention. And how do we see it? How do we scale it up in a way that is sustainable? Because the research has advanced more in the Euro-American context, we have better means of certifying and better means of training, which is still lacking in India. So I think one major challenge for the field also is that we have a lot of professionals who claim to be animal-assisted therapists and so on, but who do not have the knowledge of the field. This is a field which seems it's popular, like it's kind of whatever you would call it, Pinteresty or jo bhi hai, but it's popular. But it would be the biggest injustice to the field if its popularity is compromises the ethics and values on the basis of which it is built up. So, but when you're talking about animal assisted interventions in India, you will have to figure out what works here. What are the species of animals that work here? What are the cultures that you're dealing with? What are the belief systems that you're dealing with? What kind of spaces do animals occupy over here? What kind of interactions define bonding here? So that is where, and even training. So I will give you a short example wherein recently we were writing a paper on, the different cultures and different cultural aspects of animal assisted intervention. So a thing which came in from different cultures, for instance, the Japanese cultures, also animal assisted interventions in Israel. What was found is this entire concept of training an animal being trained, following commands to the, like you tell the animal to sit, the animal sits, you tell the animal to stand, the animal stands, you tell the animal to crawl, the animal crawls. So this kind of training actually doesn't work. So in these cultures, particularly, because that is something which is very, seen as necessary for an animal in the US. But when you go into actual therapeutic scenarios, an animal is trained is often pitied, or, the people have a sense of sympathy that why are you making an animal do all this? My friend who practices in Japan, she was telling me that people were like, I mean, they were having a lot of sympathy that why did you teach the dog to, do all this? You are kind of abusing the dog by making the dog do all this. Similarly, you may have a lot of raw emotions in an animal, for instance, which can trigger responses in a psychotherapeutic context. If an animal is too trained, you may not have that kind of mirroring happening between the animal and the client. So, taking this example from Nancy Parish Plass, she has written a lot of. She has spearheaded the Israeli, animal-assisted intervention movement, and also animal-assisted psychotherapies. So she talks about this instance where her dog Mushu, very well socialized, but not exactly trained to the hilt. So she left her client, a child, and Mushu in the room, and she just went out for a bit out of the room. Now, well-trained therapy dog would just be there, okay, just calmly sit there. But Mushu was not trained that way. The moment Mushu's human, that is Nancy, went out, Mushu tried to, claw at the door and tried to call. She was a little bit nervous that, okay, my owner has gone. And then this child who is sitting there, he says, oh, poor Mushu. She's feeling lonely. She's feeling that someone, you have abandoned her. So the feelings of abandonment, because the child himself was a victim of the same, came out because the dog showed some raw behavior. So that is why, so different cultures, different contexts may require a lot of variations in how do we look at animal assisted intervention, and what we call a very culturally sensitive approach is what is needed in this entire, context.
I think that was a beautiful example of how, in general, when we talk about the human-animal bonding and how it comes out beautifully in a very raw manner. Yeah, I think this is a good place for us to end the podcast. We spoke a lot about animal assisted therapy. We got a lot of information about how it works and what exactly about the animal human bond is beneficial for us. We understood a lot about how it helps in mental and physical ailments. Also, the most beautiful part for me was the one where we spoke about pet grief and how it's very similar to handling any kind of grief that we see ahead in our lives, and how it's sort of preparatory but also very real, and how much of social support can help in general. Any kind of grief be very much processed in a good manner if we have a social support like that, and it is sort of lacking when we talk about pet grief. So I hope with this podcast and with the information we have gotten about the loads of benefits of bonding with an animal, this is promoted a little bit and people would be more kind towards people who have lost their pets. So thank you so much, Dr. Georgitta, for joining us today and giving us information on a topic that is very close to your heart. And I think we've gotten a lot more than what we prepared and meant to ask you. I think we had limited curiosities because of our limited knowledge, but you've expanded it here for us. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for joining everyone. I hope everyone gained something from it, and we will see you in our next episode.